Is offshoring taking care of risk? The answer in many cases is no. Is offshoring providing the same quality that the customer requires? And in some cases, the answer is no. So nearshoring becomes a term.
We are very excited to welcome Eduardo Saavedra to our show today. Eduardo is the VP of Business Development of the Tetakawi Group, and he has been working for over 30 years helping companies increase value in their operation. Welcome, Eduardo.
Nice to be here. Thank you.
Eduardo, the term nearshore is something that is very in vogue today in the business world. But we would like to know a little bit about what's behind this. And you've been working for many years with companies that have engaged in strategies that have assisted them in gaining value from moving their operations to other countries, right? So what can you tell us about the context that brought us today to having nearshoring as one of the main items on business strategy?
I believe nearshoring is the result of the lessons learned from offshoring, which began 35, 40 years ago when the US and other countries in the world decided to send supply chains to the Far East, as an example. I think the lessons that we've learned over time have been the most recent lessons. Fukushima had a nuclear plant disaster that disrupted supply chains all around the world. We had COVID, not recently, that disrupted supply chains as well. Globally, we have things like Trump tariffs, an ongoing conversation about tariffs that are disrupting supply chains. So what was once a cost initiative to reduce costs, obviously, and sending operations offshore has now become a question of risk. Is offshoring taking care of risk? The answer in many cases is no. Is offshoring providing the same quality that the customer requires? And in some cases, the answer is no. So nearshoring becomes a term.
If you like this video, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, hit the like button, and activate your notifications. So you've now mentioned the factors risk and quality when addressing nearshoring, but do you believe that there's still a gain of cost when going through a nearshore strategy?
Cost is always part of the equation. I think at the end of the day, it's probably the most important driver to any decision a company makes. But the challenge is balancing the cost with the quality and with the risk. And I think that's why they're not easy decisions as opposed to 30 years ago. So I believe that companies are now looking at risk differently. They're looking at their end customer to determine what happens if we have a situation far away. Can that risk be mitigated if we bring it closer? Cost will be a factor, but it won't be the overriding factor, because we all know that in Asian countries, we all believe that at the end of the day, cost is lower. The differential might not be great with Mexico, but there's other factors that are more important than cost.
Okay. And addressing nearshoring specifically, what characteristics would you say add value to a overall operation strategy?
So proximity from a geographic standpoint probably means a lot less than proximity to a region that shares a culture. And it's becoming more and more evident that culture affinity matters to customers, for example. So if you take a country like Mexico, where pretty much everybody has a cell phone, like in the US and in Canada, actually all over the world, Mexico's neighbor to the north is bringing some of its culture south. Mexico's culture is also making its way up north. We see it in movies, we see it in social media, we see it just families and friends who are living on both sides of the border. So that cultural affinity translates into an interaction. Whether it's a personal interaction or a business interaction, it feels more at home. It's seamless, it's more natural. And I think at the end of the day, that adds value to the competitiveness of a company that depends highly on customer satisfaction.
Right. In that same sense, do you believe it makes it easier to manage an operation that's nearshore from a cultural standpoint?
Well, just talk to any of the executives that have been traveling for years to China, and all the horror stories of a 21-hour flight, like the food, the culture is completely different. They don't understand the language. It's a huge obstacle to productivity to have something in a location where you have really very little to share. So yes, the answer, the nearshoring will removes a lot of those obstacles. Now you can focus on other important features of your business. So being near versus being far from an end customer is almost logically beneficial.
So you've already addressed the travel factor when executing an offshoring strategy. Are there other elements relevant to cost when you're analyzing a nearshoring strategy versus offshoring?
I think quality relates to cost. So let's talk a little bit about how companies react to failures in the supply chain. Today, if you have an offshore operation, failures might take days, weeks, sometimes longer to address, not just because of the travel, and the distance, but just not having the boots on the ground to take care of something quickly. When you're close, when you're near, you get on a plane, tomorrow you're at the area where the failure occurred, and in a matter of days, perhaps you can resolve the issue. So time matters. If you're talking about a couple, 3 weeks to resolve an issue that it could have been done within a day or two, who would say no to that, to solving that problem through nearshoring?
Right. Eduardo, let's say that there's a director that comes to you in advice for their next steps. They already incurred in an offshore strategy and now they're considering going nearshore. What do you think you would have them be aware of?
Several factors. Number one, there's going to be a cost of transfer. They should know what that is. They should also know what disruptions are going to take place in that movement. If they are moving an entire offshore operation nearshore, that would obviously be more disruptive than to move a portion of it, which personally I think it's smarter in terms of risk mitigation to do things in a partial way versus an absolute way, unless you have to do that. I think that is probably what most companies do today. They're not shutting down their offshore operations, they're mitigating risk by creating nearshore operations.
Okay, and then let's say there's a company that has never gone beyond their borders. They have always operated in their country of origin, and now they're considering going either offshore or nearshore. What would you recommend for them to make a complete assessment of what's most convenient to them?
Well, given the times, the term offshore would not make so much sense. I think capacity is an issue. Companies that, let's say, are stationed in the United States, and they're currently having a capacity issue with labor, and everybody knows that there's labor constraints in the United States in certain industries. So even if you remove cost from the equation, or you said cost is the same, quality can be attained, but I can increase my capacity more easily if I have a nearshore operation, let's say in Mexico, then it's worth evaluating the pros and cons of that. But I think capacity today is what's driving a lot of companies to make either offshore decisions or nearshore decisions because they can't achieve the capacity in their home country.
So I believe that anybody that starts thinking about going offshore or nearshore has a concern about compliance, right? We're all worried about making sure that our operation is compliant and efficient. Do you believe that there are trade agreements or norms or laws or policies in general that favor a nearshore strategy or an offshore strategy?
I believe so. And I think the USMCA, as it's called now, doesn't just look at trade or increasing trade in a region, but it's trying to convey that it's also a good practice because we have addressed the differences in our judicial systems, for example, and they're very specifically stated in these agreements that there are rules to the game here. So these rules, and by the way, I didn't know this, but trade agreements are above the constitution of a country. So these trade agreements are not easily circumvented. And I believe that if you read through them, and anyone who wants to do nearshoring versus offshoring should at least Google a little bit what the USMCA does in terms of leveling the playing field from a legal aspect, from a regulatory aspect, and not just cost.
Also, Mexico in particular has become more and more concerned about data protection. Do you think this adds value to someone that's thinking about, whether or not to incur in an operation outside of their country?
I'm not an expert at network security, let's call that. But there are laws in the USMCA, just to be specific, that address how to deal with companies that infringe upon those laws. If you're in China, perhaps you're at a great disadvantage. You can't navigate the judicial system easily. It's fairly partial and controlled. So I believe that these trade agreements, in particular the USMCA, will add a level of comfort, if you want to call it that, that if someone violates trademark or intellectual property infringement, it can be enforced much more easily in a country that has a trade agreement.
Eduardo, in your experience, in what ways do you believe nearshoring offers a way to scale for companies that are looking to expand their operations and specifically looking to expand into Mexico?
So it's a good question. I think most companies, and I'm going to use the US as an example, don't know the amount of talent that is generated in this country through its educational system. In many cases, there is more talent than there is demand for that talent. That spells capacity for companies in the US who are looking for not just bodies, let's just say, to fulfill a certain job, but people who are competent. So it's capacity plus competency that you'll achieve if you come to a country like Mexico. There's a third component, and that is just the adaptability. And I think that those three components together make it easier to make a decision in nearshore to Mexico versus any other country.
So overall, what do you believe the future looks like when talking about nearshoring? What would you consider are the most important trends to be aware of, and where are we going with this?
I think there's an obvious shift from globalization to regionalization. In some cases, even being more domestic in terms of how companies grow. The trend seems to be clear across all industries. The geopolitical situation across the world, and specifically in Asia and China, but not limited to those areas of the world, are re-emphasizing that globalization maybe saw its best days, and that regionalizing economies makes a great deal of sense, so that we end up in a situation where economic blocks in Asia are competing with economic blocks in North America and European. We kind of have that already. I think they'll just be more mature, well thought out, and more disciplined.
Do you believe that's going to bring up the need of more collaboration between governments or even private entities? Do you think that's where we're going?
I think the drivers will be business. I think markets drive even most government decisions. At the end of the day, if the markets feel that regionalization is less risky, a better cost proposition, and achieves the quality and what the end customer is looking for, yes, I think those will be the drivers to changes around this subject.
Well, that definitely gives us a lot to think about, and we're going to take home a lot of homework to research. We really appreciate all of the insights that you've shared. We were very happy to have you on the show, and we're looking forward to talking to you again very soon.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
Thank you, Eduardo. Thank you, everyone, for watching. We hope you enjoyed the content as much as we did. Talk to you next time.